The fluorescent lights in the Hennepin County Courthouse cast harsh shadows across the polished marble floor as Sarah Chen adjusted the worn collar of her security guard uniform one final time. The navy blue fabric, though clean and pressed, showed its age in the slight fading around the shoulders and the small repair where her nameplate had been moved multiple times over the years. Her black shoes, polished to military precision despite visible scuff marks, clicked softly against the floor as she approached the metal detectors at the main entrance. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. At 42, Sarah carried herself with a quiet confidence that seemed at odds with her modest position. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, not a strand out of place, and her posture remained perfectly straight despite the weight of the equipment belt around her waist. She had learned long ago that appearances mattered in ways most people never understood, though today that lesson would be tested in ways she hadn't anticipated. The morning rush was just beginning at the downtown Minneapolis courthouse. Lawyers in expensive suits hurried past, their leather briefcases catching the light as they spoke in hushed, urgent tones about motions and depositions. Court reporters wheeled their equipment through the corridors, and clerks shuffled stacks of paperwork with the practiced efficiency of people who had done the same routine for years. Sarah took her position at the security checkpoint, scanning identification cards and monitoring the X-ray machine with the same methodical attention she brought to every shift. "Morning, Sarah," called Detective Martinez as he bypassed the metal detector with his badge. "Big day today with the Henderson case." Sarah nodded politely. "Stay safe out there, Detective." She had worked in courthouse security for 3 years, ever since moving to Minneapolis from Denver. Most of the regular staff knew her as reliable, punctual, and professional, though few knew much about her personal life. She preferred it that way. Small talk felt unnecessary when you were paid to watch for weapons and maintain order, not to make friends. Around 8:30, the atmosphere shifted as attorneys from Blackstone and Associates arrived for what was clearly an important hearing. The law firm's reputation preceded them. They represented corporate clients in high-stakes litigation and charged fees that could buy small houses. 3 young associates clustered near the elevator, their conversation loud enough to carry across the lobby. "Did you see the plaintiff's witness list?" asked Jonathan Weber, a third-year associate with perfectly styled blonde hair and a watch that cost more than most people's monthly salary. "It's mostly just family members and some local sympathizers. Nothing that'll hold up against our expert testimony." His colleague, Amanda Foster, laughed as she adjusted her designer handbag. "The whole case is a joke anyway. Military contractors have been using these disposal methods for decades. One family thinks they can take down Meridian Industries because they don't like where the waste ends up? Please." The third attorney, Marcus Reeves, glanced around the lobby with obvious disdain. "Even the courthouse security looks like it's from the bargain bin. Look at that guard over there. That uniform's seen better days." All 3 turned toward Sarah, their expressions ranging from amusement to barely concealed contempt. She continued scanning bags and checking IDs, giving no indication she had heard their comments, though her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Seriously," Weber continued, emboldened by his colleague's laughter, "what kind of person ends up working courthouse security? Couldn't cut it as real law enforcement, I guess." Foster pulled out her phone, angling it towards Sarah. "This is perfect content for the group chat. When your case is so weak, even the courthouse staff looks defeated." The mockery continued as more attorneys arrived, joining the growing cluster near the elevators. Their voices carried across the lobby, creating an atmosphere of privileged dismissal that seemed to infect others waiting in the area. A few court clerks looked uncomfortable, but no one spoke up. Sarah remained at her post, professional and composed, though those who knew her well might have noticed the slight tightening around her eyes. "Ma'am, you'll need to remove your laptop," Sarah said quietly to a nervous-looking woman approaching the X-ray machine. Her voice remained steady, betraying none of the tension building in the room. The woman fumbled with her bag, clearly intimidated by the courthouse environment. I'm sorry, I've never been here before. My son's case is today, and I don't know what I'm doing. Sarah's expression softened slightly. Take your time. Place the laptop in a separate bin and walk through slowly. You're doing fine. Behind them, the Blackstone attorneys continued their commentary. Look at that, Reeves said with a sneer, playing counselor to the other side's supporters. Very professional. Weber checked his expensive watch. We should head up. Time to show these people what real legal representation looks like. As the elevator doors opened, Foster called out loudly enough for half the lobby to hear, "Try not to let anyone dangerous through while we're upstairs, officer." The emphasis on quote, 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 with sarcasm, as though the title itself was somehow amusing. The group disappeared into the elevator, their laughter echoing in the shaft as they ascended. The lobby fell quieter, though the tension they had created lingered like smoke. Several people in line glanced at Sarah with expressions ranging from sympathy to curiosity, wondering how she would respond to such blatant disrespect. Sarah continued her duties without comment, but something had shifted in her demeanor. The careful neutrality she maintained was still present, but underneath it, those paying attention might have detected something else. Not anger or embarrassment, but a kind of quiet determination. She straightened her shoulders, adjusted her nameplate one final time, and returned her full attention to the security checkpoint. What none of the Blackstone attorneys knew, what none of their expensive research had uncovered, was that Sarah Chen wasn't just another courthouse security guard putting in time until retirement. The woman they had dismissed so casually, whose uniform they had mocked, whose position they had used as a punchline, carried with her a sealed envelope that would transform their confident morning into something entirely different. In approximately 2 hours, when Judge Patricia Hawthorne called the case of Chen versus Meridian Industries, that envelope would be opened. And when its contents were revealed, every person in that courtroom would understand exactly who they were dealing with, and why the woman in the faded security uniform had been waiting 3 years for this particular morning to arrive. Judge Patricia Hawthorne had presided over environmental litigation for 15 years, but the Chen versus Meridian Industries case presented complexities that extended far beyond typical corporate liability disputes. As she reviewed the morning docket in her chambers, the weight of the case file told only part of the story. What concerned her more were the phone calls she had received over the past week from various political figures suggesting this particular lawsuit deserved careful consideration of its broader economic implications. The case centered on Meridian Industries' chemical waste disposal practices at their facility outside Bloomington, Minnesota. For 12 years, the company had operated under proper permits, treating and disposing of industrial chemicals from aerospace and defense contractors throughout the Midwest. Their methods met federal guidelines, employed hundreds of local workers, and generated substantial tax revenue for the county. On paper, everything appeared legitimate. The plaintiff, listed simply as S. Chen in the court documents, sought damages for contamination that allegedly affected groundwater in the surrounding agricultural area. The claims seemed straightforward enough: environmental contamination, health concerns, property devaluation. Such cases typically involved years of expert testimony, soil samples, and scientific studies that judges struggled to interpret. What made this case unusual was its brevity. Most environmental suits consumed months of court time. This one was scheduled for a single day. Meridian Industries had assembled their legal dream team. Blackstone and Associates commanded hourly rates that exceeded most people's monthly salaries, and their track record in corporate defense was formidable. They had successfully defended chemical companies, pharmaceutical manufacturers, and mining operations against environmental claims across 7 states. Their strategy appeared focused on demonstrating that current disposal methods posed no significant risk to public health or the environment. The morning's proceedings began predictably. Meridian's corporate representative, Director of Operations Kenneth Morrison, testified about the company's commitment to environmental responsibility. Their manufacturing process created chemical byproducts that required specialized disposal, but everything was handled according to Environmental Protection Agency standards. Morrison emphasized the economic benefits: 340 local jobs, annual tax contributions exceeding $2 million, and partnerships with community organizations. Expert witnesses followed in careful succession. Dr. Elizabeth Garrett from the Minnesota Institute of Technology presented data showing chemical concentrations within acceptable ranges. Professor Raymond Nash from the University of Wisconsin explained how modern disposal techniques had evolved to minimize environmental impact. Each testimony built upon the previous one, creating a comprehensive defense of Meridian's operations. Throughout the morning, courthouse observers noticed an unusual dynamic. Environmental cases typically attracted activists, concerned citizens, and media representatives. This courtroom contained mostly legal professionals, a few Meridian employees, and scattered individuals whose connection to the case remained unclear. The absence of protesters or environmental groups seemed particularly noteworthy given the case's subject matter. Blackstone's strategy became increasingly apparent as the day progressed. Attorney Jonathan Weber methodically presented evidence showing property values in the affected area had actually increased over the past 5 years. Amanda Foster introduced testimony from neighboring farmers who reported no adverse effects on livestock or crop yields. Marcus Reeves cited similar cases in other states where environmental concerns had proven unfounded after extensive investigation. The plaintiff's side presented a stark contrast. No high-powered legal team occupied the opposing table. No parade of expert witnesses offered competing scientific interpretations. Instead, a modest collection of documents waited in manila folders, suggesting either inadequate preparation or unusual confidence in their case's merits. Local residents who had agreed to testify painted a different picture of life near the Meridian facility. Emma Rodriguez, whose family had farmed the area for 3 generations, described subtle changes in soil quality that became noticeable after the facility's expansion 5 years earlier. Her crops still grew, but yields had decreased, and the soil's color had shifted in ways that concerned her. Robert Thompson, a retired hydrogeologist who lived downstream from the facility, presented informal water testing results that showed elevated chemical levels in his well water. While not immediately dangerous, the concentrations exceeded levels he considered appropriate for long-term consumption. His testimony lacked the formal credentials of Meridian's experts, but his familiarity with local geology provided context that laboratory studies couldn't capture. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Dr. Michael Barnes, a family physician serving the rural community, testified about increased respiratory complaints among his patients, particularly children and elderly residents. The symptoms weren't severe enough to constitute a health crisis, but the pattern concerned him. When pressed by Blackstone attorneys about other possible causes, Dr. Barnes acknowledged that correlation didn't prove causation, but insisted the timing of symptom increases coincided with facility operations. As noon approached, the proceeding felt increasingly one-sided. Meridian's legal team had presented compelling evidence that their operations met all regulatory requirements and posed minimal environmental risk. Their expert witnesses possessed impressive credentials and extensive experience in environmental assessment. The economic arguments were particularly strong. Shutting down or significantly modifying the facility would eliminate hundreds of jobs and remove a major contributor to the local tax base. Judge Hawthorne observed the proceedings with growing curiosity about the plaintiff's apparent lack of preparation. Environmental litigation typically required substantial financial resources to compete with corporate legal teams. Expert witnesses, laboratory testing, and comprehensive environmental studies cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Yet the plaintiff seemed to be proceeding with minimal resources and limited expert testimony. The mystery deepened when she noticed that the plaintiff had not yet appeared in the courtroom. Court records listed S. Chen as representing themselves pro se, without legal counsel. Such arrangements were unusual, but not unprecedented in civil litigation. What struck Judge Hawthorne as odd was the complete absence of the plaintiff during the morning's proceedings. Blackstone attorneys appeared increasingly confident as their case unfolded. They had systematically addressed every environmental concern raised by opposing witnesses, demonstrated regulatory compliance, and highlighted the economic benefits of Meridian's operations. Their body language suggested they viewed the afternoon session as a formality before requesting summary judgment in their client's favor. The courthouse lunch break provided an opportunity for informal conversations that revealed additional context. Several court staff members mentioned they had worked with the plaintiff before, though none elaborated on the circumstances. A few suggested the case might contain surprises that weren't apparent from the morning's testimony. When proceedings resumed at 1:30, Judge Hawthorne announced that the plaintiff would finally present their case. The courtroom stirred with anticipation as everyone waited to see who would occupy the plaintiff's table and what evidence they would present to challenge Meridian's comprehensive defense. Sarah Chen's journey to that Minneapolis courthouse began 14 years earlier in a sterile laboratory at Fort Carson, Colorado, where she wore a different uniform entirely. As Captain Sarah Chen of the United States Army Chemical Corps, she specialized in environmental remediation and hazardous waste disposal for military installations across the western United States. Her expertise wasn't theoretical. It was forged through years of cleaning up contamination left by decades of military operations. Growing up in Sacramento as the daughter of Taiwanese immigrants, Sarah had watched her father build a successful engineering consulting firm from nothing. David Chen had instilled in his daughter both respect for precision and an understanding that expertise meant nothing without the courage to use it responsibly. When Sarah chose military service over joining the family business, her father had been disappointed but proud. The Army would teach her discipline, he said, but real wisdom came from knowing when rules needed to be challenged. Sarah's military career distinguished her quickly among her peers. She possessed an unusual combination of technical expertise and practical problem-solving ability that made her invaluable for complex remediation projects. At Fort Carson, she led teams responsible for cleaning up contamination from decades of weapons testing, fuel storage, and chemical training exercises. The work was painstaking and often dangerous, requiring months of soil sampling, groundwater analysis, and careful excavation of contaminated materials. Her breakthrough came during the cleanup of the Rocky Mountain Arsenal, a former chemical weapons manufacturing site outside Denver. The facility had produced everything from mustard gas to agricultural pesticides, leaving behind a toxic legacy that threatened groundwater supplies for millions of people. Sarah's team developed innovative techniques for treating contaminated soil that reduced cleanup time by 60%, while achieving better results than traditional methods. The success brought recognition and new responsibilities. Sarah was assigned to lead environmental assessments for military contractors throughout the region, evaluating facilities that manufactured everything from aircraft components to electronic systems. This work introduced her to the complex world of private companies handling military contracts, where profit margins often competed with safety protocols. It was during one such assessment in 2018 that Sarah first encountered Meridian Industries. The company had recently won a contract to dispose of chemical waste from aerospace manufacturing, and military regulations required independent environmental verification of their methods. Sarah's team spent 3 weeks at the Meridian facility, conducting comprehensive testing of their disposal processes. What she discovered troubled her deeply. While Meridian's methods technically met minimum regulatory standards, they utilized cost-cutting measures that significantly increased long-term contamination risks. The company disposed of chemical mixtures in ways that created unpredictable reactions in groundwater systems. Their monitoring procedures were minimal, designed to satisfy paperwork requirements rather than detect actual contamination. Sarah documented her concerns in a classified report that recommended enhanced oversight of Meridian's operations. The chemicals they handled included advanced aerospace lubricants, electronic cleaning solvents, and specialized coatings that could persist in soil for decades. When combined in underground systems, these substances created contamination patterns that standard testing often missed until damage became irreversible. Her report created unexpected controversy within military procurement circles. Meridian Industries had political connections that extended into congressional offices, and their disposal services saved taxpayers millions of dollars annually compared to alternative methods. Sarah found herself caught between scientific integrity and political pressure to approve operations that met minimum legal standards. The situation escalated when Sarah refused to modify her findings. Her commanding officer, Colonel Rebecca Martinez, supported her position but warned that challenging well-connected contractors carried career risks. Sarah's response was characteristic. She would rather end her military career than compromise her professional integrity. The Army had taught her to protect and serve, and that obligation extended beyond military bases to the communities they were sworn to defend. In 2019, Sarah requested early retirement from active duty, citing family obligations. The official record showed an honorable discharge with commendations for exceptional service. What the record didn't show was her growing conviction that Meridian's disposal methods would eventually cause significant environmental damage, and that someone needed to monitor the situation independently. Sarah relocated to Minneapolis specifically to be near the Meridian facility. She deliberately chose employment that would allow her to observe the company's operations without drawing attention to herself. Courthouse security provided the perfect cover, a job that required security clearance verification but appeared completely unrelated to environmental science. Her colleagues knew her as a reliable employee who had served in the military, but none knew the specifics of her expertise or her continuing interest in environmental contamination. For 3 years, Sarah methodically documented evidence of Meridian's environmental impact. She collected water samples from wells throughout the area, photographed subtle changes in vegetation patterns, and maintained detailed records of her observations. Her training in chemical analysis allowed her to conduct sophisticated testing using equipment she purchased with her military savings. This wasn't activism. It was systematic scientific investigation conducted with military precision. The breakthrough came when Sarah obtained soil samples from areas where Meridian had disposed of waste 5 years earlier. Her analysis revealed contamination patterns that matched her predictions exactly. The chemicals hadn't remained contained as company reports suggested. Instead, they were migrating through groundwater systems toward residential areas and agricultural land. The contamination wasn't immediately dangerous, but it was spreading in ways that would create serious problems within a decade. Sarah spent months verifying her findings, repeating tests to ensure accuracy, and collecting additional samples to establish contamination boundaries. She discovered that Meridian's monitoring wells were strategically placed to avoid detecting the actual contamination plume. Their quarterly reports to environmental agencies showed compliance, because they weren't testing in areas where problems were actually occurring. The decision to file a lawsuit wasn't made lightly. Sarah understood that challenging a well-connected corporation would require more than scientific evidence. She needed to navigate complex legal procedures while protecting her identity until the optimal moment for revelation. Filing pro se allowed her to control the timing and presentation of evidence without revealing her background prematurely. Sarah's strategy was methodical. She would allow Meridian's attorneys to present their case with full confidence, demonstrating regulatory compliance and expert support. Then, when they least expected it, she would present evidence that not only proved contamination was occurring, but showed that her expertise exceeded that of any witness they had presented. The envelope she carried contained documentation that would transform the entire proceeding. At precisely 1:30, Judge Patricia Hawthorne called the afternoon session to order. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as everyone waited to see who would represent the plaintiff in Chen v. Meridian Industries. Blackstone attorneys sat confidently at their table, their morning presentation having systematically dismantled every environmental concern raised by local residents. Jonathan Weber adjusted his expensive cufflinks while reviewing notes, clearly prepared to demolish whatever amateur arguments the absent plaintiff might present. The court will now hear from the plaintiff, Judge Hawthorne announced, her voice carrying across the packed courtroom. Will counsel for the plaintiff please identify themselves for the record? A movement near the back of the courtroom caught everyone's attention. From the gallery, a figure in a familiar navy blue security uniform began walking down the center aisle. Several people turned in their seats, confused by what appeared to be a security issue during active proceedings. Marcus Reeves started to object, assuming a courthouse employee was inappropriately interrupting the session. Sarah Chen walked with measured steps toward the plaintiff's table, her posture military straight despite the surprised murmurs beginning to ripple through the courtroom. The manila envelope she carried seemed suddenly significant, rather than routine courthouse paperwork. Her expression remained composed, professional, revealing nothing of the transformation about to unfold. "Your Honor," Sarah said clearly as she reached the plaintiff's table, "Sarah Chen, appearing pro se as plaintiff in this matter." The reaction was immediate and electric. Weber's pen dropped from his hand, clattering against the wooden table. Foster's mouth opened slightly as recognition dawned. Behind them, Kenneth Morrison from Meridian Industries leaned forward, his confident demeanor evaporating as he processed what he was seeing. "The security guard?" Reeves whispered loudly enough for half the courtroom to hear. "This has to be some kind of joke." Judge Hawthorne raised her hand for silence, but her own expression showed surprise. She had presided over thousands of cases, but never had a courthouse employee simultaneously served as a litigant in her courtroom. The procedural implications alone were complex, but something in Sarah's bearing suggested this was no amateur mistake. Sarah opened her envelope with deliberate precision, removing a thick stack of documents bound with military efficiency. "Your Honor, I request permission to present evidence that I believe will materially affect this court's understanding of the environmental issues in question." The Blackstone team exchanged rapid whispers. Amanda Foster pulled out her phone, presumably to research whether courthouse employees could file lawsuits in their own workplace. Weber began frantically shuffling through papers, looking for some procedural objection that could derail whatever was happening. "Before we proceed," Judge Hawthorne said carefully, "the court needs to address the unusual circumstances of this case. Ms. Chen, are you currently employed by this courthouse?" "Yes, Your Honor. I work at courthouse security, which requires federal security clearance due to the sensitive nature of proceedings handled in this facility. My background investigation included verification of my military service and professional qualifications." Something in the way Sarah emphasized, quote, "professional qualifications," made Judge Hawthorne pause. She had seen enough pro se litigants to recognize when someone possessed legal knowledge beyond their apparent circumstances. This woman's language and bearing suggested experience with formal proceedings that extended far beyond courthouse security. "Your Honor," Weber interjected, rising hastily, "Blackstone and Associates objects to these highly irregular proceedings. The plaintiff appears to have concealed material information about her employment status and potential conflicts of interest. We move for immediate dismissal based on procedural violations and ethical concerns." Sarah remained standing at attention, waiting for permission to respond. Judge Hawthorne noticed the military precision in her posture, the way she held the documents, the complete absence of nervousness, despite facing down one of the state's most aggressive legal teams. "Ms. Chen, do you have a response to counsel's objection?" "Your Honor, my employment as courthouse security in no way compromises the validity of this environmental litigation. My qualifications to bring this case are documented in the materials I'm prepared to present. I respectfully request the opportunity to establish standing before addressing procedural concerns." The confidence in Sarah's voice was unmistakable. This wasn't someone desperately hoping to stumble through legal proceedings. She spoke with the authority of someone who understood exactly what she was doing and why. Judge Hawthorne made a decision that would transform the entire afternoon. The court will allow the plaintiff to proceed with establishing standing. "Mr. Weber, your objection is noted but premature. We'll address procedural concerns after hearing the plaintiff's evidence." Sarah opened her folder and removed the first document, a military discharge certificate listing her rank as Captain, United States Army Chemical Corps. She placed it on the evidence table where everyone could see it clearly. The shift in the courtroom was palpable. Whispers began in the gallery as people realized the security guard they had dismissed was a former military officer. The Blackstone attorney's confident expressions began to crack as they processed the implications. "Your Honor," Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger, "I am Captain Sarah Chen, retired, with 14 years of active duty specializing in environmental remediation and hazardous waste disposal for military installations. My expertise includes chemical contamination assessment, groundwater analysis, and environmental compliance for military contractors." Morrison from Meridian Industries went pale. Weber frantically typed on his laptop, presumably searching for any reference to Sarah's military background in their case preparation. Foster stared at the discharge certificate, as though it might disappear if she looked hard enough. Judge Hawthorne leaned forward, her interest clearly piqued. Captain Chen, what is your specific expertise regarding the environmental issues in this case? Sarah removed another document from her folder, a classified assessment report with large sections redacted but bearing official military seals. Your Honor, in 2018, I conducted a comprehensive environmental assessment of Meridian Industries' disposal methods as part of their military contract verification. My findings raised significant concerns about long-term contamination risks that were not addressed in their subsequent operations. The silence in the courtroom was complete. Every person present understood they were witnessing something unprecedented. Not just a lawsuit, but the revelation of expertise and evidence that could fundamentally change everything they thought they knew about the case. Weber made one last desperate attempt to regain control. Your Honor, even if the plaintiff possesses military experience, this doesn't establish standing for civilian environmental claims or validate evidence that may be classified or privileged. Sarah looked directly at the Blackstone team for the first time since entering the courtroom. Her expression remained professional, but there was something unmistakably steely in her gaze. Your Honor, the evidence I'm prepared to present was gathered independently using my own resources and expertise over a 3-year period. It demonstrates ongoing contamination that poses significant risks to public health and groundwater systems. I believe this court will find it compelling. Judge Hawthorne realized she was presiding over something far more complex than a routine environmental dispute. The woman standing before her wasn't just another pro se litigant hoping for the best. She was a trained environmental specialist with apparent inside knowledge of the defendant's operations. The court will hear your evidence, Captain Chen. Sarah approached the evidence table with the same methodical precision she had once used to handle hazardous materials in military laboratories. From her envelope, she produced a series of photographs, laboratory reports, and detailed maps that she arranged in chronological order. Each document bore the professional formatting and technical terminology that comes only from years of scientific training. Your Honor, I'd like to begin with Exhibit A, aerial photography showing the Meridian facility's waste disposal areas over a 5-year period. Sarah placed enlarged photographs before the court, pointing to specific areas with a laser pointer she had brought from her own equipment. These images demonstrate the expansion of disposal operations beyond the originally permitted boundaries. Judge Hawthorne examined the photographs closely. What appeared to casual observers as simple industrial development showed clear patterns of environmental impact when viewed through expert analysis. Sarah had annotated the images with technical precision, highlighting changes in vegetation, soil discoloration, and water flow patterns that told a comprehensive story of contamination spread. The defendant's expert witnesses testified this morning that their disposal methods contained chemicals within approved boundaries, Sarah continued. However, my independent analysis demonstrates that containment failed within 18 months of initial disposal operations. Weber attempted another objection. Your Honor, the plaintiff hasn't established the authenticity or chain of custody for these photographs. We have no way to verify when or how they were obtained. Sarah reached into her folder and produced a thick binder. Your Honor, all photographic evidence includes GPS coordinates, timestamps, and weather conditions. I maintained detailed field notes using standard military documentation protocols. Each site visit was recorded with the same precision required for environmental assessments on military installations. She opened the binder to reveal pages of handwritten observations, each entry dated and signed, with weather conditions, soil temperatures, and precise location data. The methodical documentation clearly came from someone with extensive experience in environmental fieldwork. Furthermore, Sarah added, I collected soil and water samples using EPA-approved methods and analyzed them using equipment certified for environmental testing. The laboratory results demonstrate contamination levels that exceed safe limits in 12 distinct locations. Morrison from Meridian Industries leaned over to whisper urgently with his attorneys. Their morning confidence had completely evaporated as they realized they were facing someone with expertise that potentially exceeded their own expert witnesses. Sarah continued her presentation with devastating precision. Exhibit C demonstrates the migration pattern of chemical contamination through groundwater systems. The defendant's monitoring wells are positioned to avoid detecting this migration, creating a false impression of environmental safety. She produced a detailed hydrogeological map showing underground water flow patterns, contamination boundaries, and the locations of Meridian's monitoring wells. The wells were clearly positioned upstream from contamination areas, explaining why company reports consistently showed acceptable chemical levels. "How did you obtain this hydrogeological data?" Judge Hawthorne asked, clearly impressed by the technical sophistication of the evidence. "Your Honor, my military training included advanced hydrogeological analysis for base cleanup operations. I used standard geological survey techniques combined with soil permeability testing to map underground water movement. This is the same methodology I employed during the Rocky Mountain Arsenal remediation project." Amanda Foster frantically typed on her laptop, presumably researching the Rocky Mountain Arsenal cleanup. What she discovered only deepened their legal problems. The Arsenal cleanup was one of the largest and most successful environmental remediation projects in U.S. history, requiring expertise at the highest levels of environmental science. Sarah's most damaging evidence came next. Exhibit D contains chemical analysis results showing the presence of aerospace lubricants, electronic solvents, and specialized coating compounds in residential water wells. These chemicals are unique to the military contracts that Meridian Industries handles, establishing a direct connection between their disposal operations and civilian contamination. She produced laboratory reports showing detailed chemical fingerprinting that could only have been conducted with advanced analytical equipment. The results were damning. Chemicals that shouldn't exist anywhere near residential areas were present in concentrations that posed long-term health risks. The defendant's expert testimony claimed that chemical disposal methods posed no risk to surrounding communities, Sarah continued. However, my analysis demonstrates that chemical combinations create contamination patterns significantly more dangerous than individual compounds. The defendant's experts apparently failed to consider synergistic effects of mixed chemical disposal. Quote, Reeves made a final desperate attempt to challenge Sarah's evidence. Your Honor, even if the plaintiff possesses military training, she hasn't established authority to conduct independent environmental analysis on private property. These samples may have been obtained through trespassing or other illegal means. Sarah's response revealed the depth of her preparation. Your Honor, all samples were collected from public rights-of-way, publicly accessible water sources, and private property with explicit permission from property owners. I have written consent forms from 17 property owners who granted access for environmental testing. She produced another folder containing signed consent forms, each notarized and properly executed. The property owners had clearly understood they were participating in legitimate environmental investigation. Judge Hawthorne asked the question that everyone was thinking. Captain Chen, why didn't you report these findings to environmental protection agencies rather than filing a private lawsuit? Sarah's answer revealed both her military integrity and her frustration with bureaucratic limitations. Your Honor, I submitted preliminary findings to the EPA Regional Office in 2021. I was informed that enforcement action would require a full investigation lasting 3 to 5 years, during which contamination would continue spreading. Private litigation allows for immediate injunctive relief while environmental damage can still be contained. The moment of complete vindication came when Sarah presented her final exhibit. Your Honor, Exhibit F contains my original 2018 military assessment of Meridian Industries' disposal methods. This classified report, now declassified for these proceedings, predicted exactly the contamination patterns I have documented over the past 3 years. She placed the official military report before the court, bearing stamps and signatures that verified its authenticity. The report's predictions matched her current findings with scientific precision, demonstrating that the contamination wasn't accidental but the inevitable result of inadequate disposal methods. Morrison from Meridian Industries stood abruptly. Your Honor, my company requests an immediate recess to consult with our environmental compliance team. Your Honor, Weber added weakly, Blackstone and Associates needs time to review this extensive new evidence and consult with our expert witnesses. Quote, Judge Hawthorne looked at the mountain of technical evidence spread across her courtroom, then at Sarah standing calmly beside the plaintiff's table. The woman, who had been dismissed as a mere security guard, had just presented one of the most comprehensive environmental cases the court had ever seen. Captain Chen, does your evidence establish ongoing environmental damage that requires immediate intervention? Yes, Your Honor. The contamination is actively spreading through groundwater systems toward residential areas. Without immediate remediation, the affected area will triple in size within 2 years, potentially affecting drinking water for thousands of residents. The courtroom remained silent as the implications sank in. Sarah Chen had not only proven her case, she had demonstrated environmental expertise that surpassed everyone who had testified that morning. The woman they had mocked for her worn security uniform had just delivered one of the most devastating environmental presentations in the court's history. The transformation began within hours of Judge Hawthorne's ruling. By 5 o'clock that evening, Meridian Industries had agreed to an immediate suspension of waste disposal operations pending comprehensive environmental remediation. The company also committed to funding independent monitoring of all affected areas and establishing a $20 million remediation fund administered by the State Environmental Protection Agency. Jonathan Weber sat in his car outside the courthouse for 20 minutes after the proceedings ended, staring at his phone screen without seeing it. The confident attorney who had mocked Sarah's uniform that morning now faced the professional humiliation of having been completely outmaneuvered by someone he had dismissed as irrelevant. His carefully constructed arrogance had crumbled in the face of genuine expertise, leaving him questioning everything he thought he knew about competence and worth. That evening, Weber submitted his resignation from Blackstone and Associates. His resignation letter, which would later become public during the firm's internal investigation, contained a paragraph that surprised even his closest colleagues. I have spent my career believing that expensive suits and prestigious degrees determined a person's value. Today I learned that true expertise speaks quietly until the moment it changes everything. I can no longer represent clients whose primary qualification is their ability to pay our fees. Weber's transformation proved the most dramatic, but he wasn't alone. Amanda Foster, who had taken photos to mock Sarah earlier that morning, found herself researching environmental law programs at night. The technical precision of Sarah's presentation had revealed a world of expertise that Foster's corporate litigation experience had never exposed her to. Within 6 months, she would leave Blackstone to join the Environmental Law Institute, taking a 70% salary reduction to work on cases that actually mattered. The impact rippled beyond the legal profession. Kenneth Morrison, Meridian's director of operations, requested an immediate meeting with company executives to discuss fundamental changes in their environmental practices. Morrison had watched Sarah dismantle his company's defense with evidence so comprehensive that continuing current operations would constitute willful environmental destruction. We need to hire her, Morrison told Meridian's board of directors 3 days after the trial. Captain Chen knows more about environmental remediation than our entire consulting team combined. If we're going to clean up this mess properly, we need someone who understands what they're doing. Meridian's board approved Morrison's recommendation unanimously. They offered Sarah a position as Director of Environmental Compliance, with a salary triple her courthouse security wages and complete authority over the company's remediation efforts. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The company that had fought her in court now desperately needed her expertise to survive. Sarah's response surprised everyone. She declined the lucrative position, but agreed to serve as an independent environmental consultant, maintaining her courthouse security job while overseeing Meridian's cleanup efforts. Her explanation revealed the depth of her character. I didn't fight this battle for money or career advancement. I fought it because communities deserve protection from environmental damage. The best way to ensure proper remediation is to maintain my independence. The local community's reaction was equally profound. Emma Rodriguez, the farmer who had testified about soil quality changes, organized a town hall meeting to honor Sarah's efforts. Over 300 residents attended, including many who had initially dismissed environmental concerns as obstacles to economic development. She could have stayed quiet, Rodriguez told the gathering. She had a steady job and no obligation to fight for our land. But she spent 3 years collecting evidence and risking her career because she knew it was right. That's the kind of neighbor we all should be. The town hall sparked broader community engagement in environmental protection. Residents formed the Bloomington Environmental Watch, a citizen monitoring group that conducts monthly water testing and soil analysis using methods Sarah taught them. The group's activities expanded beyond Meridian's facility to include monitoring of other industrial operations throughout the county. Dr. Michael Barnes, the family physician who had testified about respiratory symptoms, established the Rural Environmental Health Clinic with funding from Meridian's settlement. The clinic provides free health screenings for residents living near industrial facilities and maintains a database tracking environmental health trends across rural Minnesota. Dr. Barnes credits Sarah's case with demonstrating the importance of community-level environmental monitoring. Perhaps the most significant institutional change occurred within the Minnesota Environmental Protection Agency. Sarah's documentation of monitoring well placement designed to avoid contamination detection prompted a comprehensive review of industrial oversight procedures. The agency implemented new requirements for contamination monitoring that prevent companies from strategically avoiding problem areas. Agency Director Patricia Walsh announced the policy changes at a press conference, explicitly crediting Sarah's work. Captain Chen's investigation revealed systematic weaknesses in our monitoring protocols. Her evidence demonstrated that technical expertise and persistent observation can detect environmental problems that traditional oversight might miss. We're implementing new standards to ensure this never happens again. The case attracted national attention from environmental law professors who recognized its significance for citizen-led environmental protection. Professor Elizabeth Garrett from the University of Minnesota Law School published a case study examining how individual expertise can challenge corporate environmental claims when regulatory agencies lack resources for comprehensive oversight. The Chen versus Meridian case demonstrates that environmental protection sometimes requires citizens to take initiative when traditional oversight fails, Professor Garrett wrote. Captain Chen's military training provided her with unique qualifications, but her case establishes important precedents for citizen environmental monitoring. The precedent proved influential beyond Minnesota. Environmental groups in 6 states cited Sarah's case when challenging industrial waste disposal operations, using her documentation methods as templates for citizen-led investigations. The Chen Protocol became shorthand for systematic environmental monitoring conducted by qualified individuals outside traditional regulatory frameworks. Sarah's daily routine changed remarkably little despite her legal victory and newfound recognition. She continued reporting for courthouse security shifts at 7:30 each morning, maintaining the same professional demeanor that had characterized her work before the trial. However, her lunch breaks now often included site visits to monitor Meridian's remediation progress. The courthouse staff treated Sarah with new respect, though she discouraged dramatic changes in their interactions. Detective Martinez, who had greeted her casually that morning, now approached with obvious admiration for her environmental expertise. Sarah appreciated the respect, but insisted on maintaining normal working relationships. "I'm still the same person who checks IDs and operates the metal detector," she told her supervisor when he suggested promoting her to head of courthouse security. "My job is to maintain safety and security. That's what I plan to keep doing." The most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. 3 weeks after the trial, Sarah received a handwritten letter from Colonel Rebecca Martinez, her former commanding officer. The letter contained a single paragraph that meant more to Sarah than any legal victory. "Captain Chen, your environmental work in Minnesota demonstrates the finest traditions of military service. You identified a threat to civilian welfare, gathered intelligence with professional precision, and executed a mission that protected innocent people from harm. That's exactly what we trained you to do. The uniform may be different, but the service continues." Quote. 5 years after the Meridian Industries trial, Sarah Chen received an invitation that would have seemed impossible during her quiet years as courthouse security. The United Nations Environment Program requested her testimony before the Global Environmental Justice Summit in Geneva, Switzerland. World leaders, environmental scientists, and community advocates from 47 countries wanted to hear how a single individual could challenge corporate environmental violations and create lasting institutional change. Sarah declined the invitation, as she had declined dozens of similar requests over the years. Her handwritten response, delivered through the EPA's International Liaison Office, contained a single paragraph that captured her philosophy. Environmental protection happens in communities, not conference rooms. My expertise serves local people facing local problems. The real experts you need to hear from are the community advocates who have learned to protect their own environments using the tools and methods we've developed together. The UN's invitation reflected how profoundly Sarah's case had influenced international environmental policy. The Chen model for community-based environmental monitoring had been implemented in rural areas across Europe, agricultural regions in South America, and mining communities in Africa. Each adaptation reflected local conditions, while maintaining the systematic documentation and scientific precision that made community evidence legally compelling. Dr. Kwame Asante, who directed environmental justice programs for the UN, credited Sarah's case with demonstrating that environmental protection required both technical expertise and community empowerment. Captain Chen showed the world that environmental knowledge exists outside universities and consulting firms. Dr. Asante explained to delegates at the Geneva Summit, communities possess intimate understanding of their environments that scientific institutions often miss. The Chen model teaches us to combine community knowledge with scientific methodology in ways that create powerful advocacy for environmental protection. The international impact had begun 3 years earlier, when Maria Santos, a former student at the Chen Institute, brought community monitoring techniques to her hometown in Guatemala. Santos used Sarah's documentation methods to investigate contamination from coffee processing facilities that threatened drinking water for 12 villages. Her evidence prompted the Guatemalan government to implement new environmental standards for agricultural processing that protected rural communities throughout the country. Similar success stories emerged from every continent. In Nigeria, a retired petroleum engineer used Chen protocol methodologies to document oil contamination that multinational corporations had concealed for decades. His evidence supported community legal actions that resulted in comprehensive cleanup efforts and compensation for affected families. In the Philippines, fishing communities adapted Sarah's techniques to monitor ocean contamination from industrial shipping, leading to new international regulations for cargo vessel waste disposal. Each international application demonstrated the universal applicability of systematic environmental documentation combined with community organization. The Chen model worked across cultures and legal systems because it addressed fundamental challenges that communities faced everywhere. How to translate environmental concerns into evidence that institutions would respect, and how to build local capacity for ongoing environmental protection. Back in Minneapolis, Sarah continued her courthouse security duties while quietly mentoring the growing network of environmental advocates who sought her guidance. Her daily routine remained unchanged, arriving at 7:30 each morning, checking identification cards, monitoring metal detectors with professional attention. Yet her influence extended far beyond the courthouse walls, through correspondence with community groups, consultation on technical questions, and occasional testimony in environmental cases where her expertise could make a decisive difference. The courthouse itself had evolved into an informal center for environmental justice education. Law students from across the Midwest arranged visits to observe proceedings in Courtroom 4, hoping to understand how environmental evidence could overcome corporate legal advantages. Environmental science programs organized field trips that combined courthouse visits with tours of the restored Meridian site, allowing students to see the complete cycle, from contamination detection to legal resolution to environmental restoration. Judge Patricia Hawthorne, now retired but serving as a visiting professor at the University of Minnesota Law School, often spoke about how the Chen case had transformed her understanding of expertise and evidence. That trial taught me to listen to what people are actually saying rather than making assumptions based on their appearance or credentials, she told her environmental law students. Expertise announces itself through the quality of evidence and the depth of knowledge, not through expensive suits or impressive titles. Her classroom had become a pilgrimage site for law students studying environmental advocacy. The walls displayed photographs from the Chen trial, including images of Sarah presenting her technical evidence and the dramatic moment when the courtroom fell silent upon learning her true background. Students learned to analyze the case not just as legal precedent, but as a masterclass in preparation, persistence, and the power of authentic expertise. The educational impact extended beyond formal academic programs. The Chen Institute for Community Environmental Science had graduated over 200 students who now worked in communities across North America, applying systematic environmental monitoring techniques while building local capacity for environmental protection. Each graduate carried forward not just technical skills but Sarah's philosophy that expertise meant nothing without willingness to serve communities that needed protection. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, one of the Institute's first graduates, had established environmental monitoring programs in 7 agricultural communities across Iowa and Nebraska. Her work helped farmers document soil and water quality changes that influence state agricultural policies while protecting rural drinking water supplies. Rodriguez credited her training with providing tools to translate traditional farming knowledge into scientific evidence that regulatory agencies could act upon. Sarah Chen taught us that environmental science isn't about proving how smart you are, Rodriguez explained to a conference of rural environmental advocates. It's about providing communities with tools to protect themselves. Every technique we use, every method we teach, has to serve people who live with environmental challenges every day. Another graduate, James Wilson, worked with Native American communities in Montana and Wyoming to monitor environmental impacts from mineral extraction operations. His documentation helped tribal governments negotiate better environmental protections in mining agreements while building tribal capacity for ongoing environmental oversight. Wilson's success demonstrated how Chen model techniques could strengthen indigenous environmental sovereignty. The legal profession's transformation proved equally significant. Environmental law clinics reported that attorneys trained in Chen model methodologies achieved success rates significantly higher than traditional environmental advocacy approaches. The combination of community engagement and technical precision created compelling cases that overcame the financial advantages that corporations traditionally enjoyed in environmental litigation. Marcus Thompson, a partner at a Chicago environmental law firm, described the Chen model as revolutionary for legal practice. Before Sarah Chen's case, environmental law was mostly about hiring expensive expert witnesses and hoping their credentials would impress judges, Thompson explained to the Illinois State Bar Association. The Chen model teaches us to build community expertise that creates more compelling evidence while empowering communities to advocate for themselves. The approach had influenced high-profile environmental cases across the country. Communities in West Virginia used Chen model techniques to document groundwater contamination from chemical manufacturing that had been dismissed by state regulators for over a decade. Their evidence prompted federal intervention and resulted in one of the largest environmental cleanup settlements in Appalachian history. In Louisiana, fishing communities adapted Sarah's methodologies to monitor ocean contamination from offshore oil operations. Their systematic documentation revealed pollution patterns that federal agencies had missed, leading to new regulations for offshore drilling that protected marine ecosystems throughout the Gulf of Mexico. Each success story reinforced the Chen model's core principle. Environmental protection required communities to develop their own expertise, rather than depending on outside institutions that might not prioritize community welfare. Sarah's example had demonstrated that such expertise was achievable when communities combined systematic observation with scientific methodology and persistent advocacy. The corporate response to Chen model implementation revealed how profoundly the approach had shifted environmental compliance calculations. Companies facing potential community investigations found that traditional strategies of hiring expensive consultants and aggressive legal teams no longer guaranteed favorable outcomes. Communities equipped with scientific expertise and legal knowledge could challenge corporate environmental claims with unprecedented effectiveness. Meridian Industries had become an unexpected showcase for corporate environmental responsibility. Kenneth Morrison, still serving as Director of Operations, regularly spoke to business conferences about the economic benefits of proactive environmental compliance. The company's transformation from environmental liability to restoration leader had generated consulting contracts and environmental services revenue that exceeded their original waste disposal operations. Our legal battle with Captain Chen was the most expensive education we ever received, but also the most valuable, Morrison told a gathering of industrial managers. We learned that environmental compliance isn't just about avoiding legal problems. It's about building sustainable relationships with the communities where we operate. Those relationships have become our most important business asset. The company employed 3 times as many people as before the lawsuit, with jobs focused on environmental restoration, monitoring system installation, and consulting services for other companies seeking to improve their environmental performance. Meridian's success had influenced industrial practices throughout the region, as companies recognized that environmental violations could trigger community investigations using proven methodologies. The transformation extended beyond individual companies to entire industrial sectors. Trade associations began incorporating Chen model awareness into their environmental compliance training, teaching member companies to anticipate systematic community monitoring and to build relationships with local environmental advocates. This shift represented a fundamental change in how industries approached community relations and environmental responsibility. Meanwhile, the community impact in Bloomington had evolved into a comprehensive model for rural environmental resilience. The Environmental Watch Group had expanded into the Bloomington Sustainability Cooperative, addressing not only environmental monitoring but also local food systems, renewable energy development, and community economic initiatives that reduced environmental impact while strengthening local prosperity. Emma Rodriguez, now serving as the cooperative's executive director, had become a national spokesperson for community-based environmental protection. Her testimony before congressional committees influenced federal environmental policy, and her speaking engagements attracted audiences throughout rural America. She consistently emphasized that environmental protection required community empowerment rather than dependence on external expertise. Sarah Chen showed us that we don't have to choose between economic development and environmental protection, Rodriguez told a gathering of rural community leaders. When communities have the tools to monitor and protect their own environments, they can support economic activities that strengthen rather than threaten their long-term welfare. The cooperative had prevented 12 potential contamination incidents through early detection and community advocacy, while supporting local businesses that demonstrated environmental responsibility. Their approach integrated environmental protection with community economic development in ways that attracted attention from rural development specialists worldwide. Dr. Michael Barnes had transformed the Rural Environmental Health Clinic into a regional research center that documented connections between community environmental protection and public health outcomes. His research provided compelling evidence that communities with active environmental monitoring programs experienced significantly better health indicators across multiple measures. Environmental protection is community health protection, Dr. Barnes explained it to a conference of public health professionals. When communities feel empowered to monitor and protect their environments, stress levels decrease, respiratory health improves, and overall community wellness increases dramatically. Environmental justice creates health justice. The clinic's findings had influenced medical education programs nationwide, as medical schools recognized the importance of environmental health training for primary care physicians. The clinic also provided training for community health workers who learned to recognize environmental health symptoms and to connect communities with resources for environmental investigation and advocacy. As Sarah completed her courthouse security shift on a gray December afternoon 5 years after the trial, she reflected on how the world around her had changed, while her commitment to service remained constant. Young environmental advocates regularly sought her advice, community groups requested her consultation on technical questions, and environmental science programs invited her to speak about community-based monitoring techniques. She responded to these requests with the same methodical attention she brought to every responsibility, providing guidance and support while maintaining her courthouse security position. Her commitment to this role reflected deep understanding about how change actually occurred in society, through sustained presence in institutions where decisions were made, through relationships built over time with people who might need environmental expertise, and through quiet demonstration that service mattered more than recognition. The uniform that had once attracted mockery had become a symbol of authentic expertise and genuine commitment to community protection. Environmental advocates throughout the country wore courthouse security uniforms to protests and hearings, as a way of honoring Sarah's example and challenging assumptions about competence and credibility. Her influence extended through countless individual stories of transformation and empowerment. students who had learned Chen model techniques were protecting communities across the globe. Attorneys who had witnessed her courtroom presentation were building legal practices that served environmental justice rather than corporate profits. Community advocates who had learned from her example were building local capacity for environmental protection that would continue for generations. The most profound recognition came not from institutions or organizations, but from communities whose environments were safer because of methods and approaches that traced back to her example. Children in rural schools learned environmental monitoring techniques by studying her investigation of Meridian Industries. Farmers across the Midwest tested their soil using procedures adapted from her protocols. Fishing communities monitored water quality using equipment configurations she had pioneered. On the 5th anniversary of the trial, Sarah received a package containing a handmade quilt created by women from 12 communities that had used Chen model techniques to address environmental challenges. Each square depicted a local environmental success story: a contaminated site cleaned up, a pollution source eliminated, a drinking water supply protected. The center square showed a courthouse with words embroidered in careful script: "Expertise serves community." The accompanying letter, signed by representatives from all 12 communities, contained words that captured the essence of Sarah's legacy. "Your example taught us that environmental protection requires both knowledge and courage, both technical skill and community commitment. You showed us that ordinary people can acquire extraordinary expertise when their communities need protection. Thank you for demonstrating that service matters more than recognition, that communities matter more than corporations, and that persistence can overcome any institutional advantage." Sarah carefully folded the letter and placed it in her desk drawer beside similar messages from environmental advocates around the world. Each letter represented communities that were safer, air and water that were cleaner, and people who had learned to protect themselves rather than waiting for others to provide protection. As winter darkness settled over Minneapolis, Sarah prepared for another evening of correspondence with community groups seeking technical guidance for environmental investigations. Her advice would travel to fishing villages in Alaska, farming communities in Kansas, industrial towns in Pennsylvania, and urban neighborhoods facing environmental justice challenges across the country. The courthouse security guard, who had once been dismissed for her appearance, continued serving communities that needed environmental protection, demonstrating through daily action that expertise carried obligations that transcended personal advancement. Her example provided hope that environmental challenges could be addressed through individual commitment, combined with community organization, scientific methodology, and persistent advocacy for justice. Sarah Chen had shown that environmental protection was both possible and necessary when ordinary people decided to take extraordinary action for the communities they served. The real measure of her success wasn't any single achievement, but the knowledge that countless communities were better protected because one person had refused to accept environmental contamination as inevitable. Tomorrow would bring new requests for assistance, new communities seeking guidance, new challenges requiring the combination of technical expertise and community empowerment that had become Sarah's signature contribution to environmental protection. She was ready to serve, as she had always been ready, carrying forward the conviction that expertise meant nothing without the willingness to use it for others' benefit. The worn security uniform hung in her locker, clean and pressed for another day of service, carrying with it the weight of responsibility and the promise of protection that defined both her character and her legacy. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.